The other 3 disciples had fasted for 30 days with him. They were gaunt, haggard, eyes sunk deep into their sockets. But he was the only one who still walked among them without losing his footing. None of them would see the end of this day. He knew it, they knew it, yet they still stood before him, waiting for an answer, waiting for him to break the sacred rule, his voice as dry as the desert wind that howled around them. We have waited patiently. We are ready. The others murmured in agreement, their faces drawn and pale in the firelight. To eat so that they could eat, to sleep so that they could sleep. Summoning the strength he needed to break the sacred rule, he became the conduit through which the demon Azazel would rise, to defy the will of the Creator and embrace the darkness within him. For he had seen what lay beyond, that they were about to commit an act that would shatter the very foundations of their faith. The air grew colder, sending shivers down their spines. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from thirst. "What if we are not ready?" The temperature had been dropping steadily since the sunset, and now a fine layer of frost began to form on the ground. A clearing in the desert where the ground was hard-packed sand. In the center stood a lone rock monolith, stark and imposing against the dark sky. The leader began the incantation, his words guttural and harsh, each syllable a hammer blow against the silence of the night. "We offer you our devotion, our souls, our very essence. Grant us power beyond measure. Grant us strength in our hour of need." The wind whipped around them, growing in intensity, and the whispers in the wind grew louder, forming words, forming sentences. This was the nexus point, the place where the boundary between the worlds was at its thinnest. Something ancient, something evil, something that had lain dormant for eons. A presence that reeked of sulfur and decay, of death and damnation. "There is no readiness," he replied, his voice firm. "What is it that you desire?" A sound that scraped against their souls like nails on a chalkboard. And the leader screamed as his body was racked with pain, as his bones were broken and rebuilt, as his muscles were torn and knitted back together. Or rather they were, for they were no longer human. They were vessels now, empty shells inhabited by the essence of their darkest fears. His disciples fared no better. Their bodies twisted and contorted. His flesh had rotted, revealing the maggots that squirmed within. His eyes bulged, milky white, and his mouth gaped open, revealing a cavernous void where his tongue should have been. And he realized with a jolt that he was still alive, or rather he was still conscious. Their screams lost in the maelstrom of Azazel's power. "Power and strength you shall have," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Power and strength beyond your wildest dreams." Their actions were driven by nothing more than blind ambition, a thirst for power that had consumed their better judgment. Then suddenly, as if in response to their call, the wind around them seemed to coalesce, forming a vortex of pure energy. Condemned to wander the earth, cursed to exist on the fringes of humanity. "Behold," he hissed, his voice a symphony of malice and amusement. Their monstrous forms hidden in the shadows cast by the dunes. Their existence entwined with the darkness that clung to the edges of the world. They were the children of Azazel, forever banished from the light, forever condemned to roam the endless sands, forever hungry, forever thirsty, forever damned. The sun, their eternal tormentor, beat down on the wasteland, reminding them of their mortality, of the life they had once known. And the disciple recoiled as if burned, but not because of pain. He recoiled because of what he saw. "You are my servants now, forever bound to me, forever damned." One that echoed in the desolate expanse of their souls. Why? Why had they done this? Why had they forsaken everything they had ever held dear for a taste of power, for a whisper of forbidden knowledge? They had unleashed a force beyond their comprehension, a force that would consume them, body and soul. "This is the crossroads," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. They remembered who they were, who they had been. Here we will call upon Azazel, and I warn you, once he is summoned, there is no turning back. There is only faith. A vast wasteland of sand and rock and twisted, thorny bushes. The moon, shrouded in clouds, offered no guidance, leaving them in total darkness. "It is done," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "Azazel, I am ready." The wind picked up, swirling around them, carrying with it the sound of whispers, voices too faint to decipher, yet filled with malice and intent. And tonight, our faith will be tested, casting the world in an eerie twilight. The 5 figures huddled closer around the dying embers of their campfire. His disciples stirred, their bodies aching from the prolonged fast, their minds tormented by the specter of the approaching darkness. The silence was heavy. Their destination was the heart of the desert, a place where the veil between the worlds was thinnest. There, beneath the shroud of night, they would summon the demon Azazel, a being of pure evil whose very essence was the embodiment of their darkest fears, broken only by the crackling of the flames and the distant howl of the desert wind. Each of them was lost in their own thoughts, grappling with the knowledge that soon they would face the consequences of their actions. He knew what they were about to unleash, yet he still chose to proceed. The others were so weak that even the light from the sun beat against them like a whip. Their bodies burned, but not from the sun. It was the hunger, or rather what it did to them from within. He looked at his followers, these brothers in arms, who had been by his side since the beginning, and he felt nothing but pity. They've traded their souls for a morsel of bread, for a draught of water, for the warmth of a fire. But there is no salvation now. There is no turning back. All we can do is face the abyss and hope that in the end we may find peace. He understood their desperation, but how could he explain to them that it wasn't just their bodies that would be consumed? Instead, he reached out and touched the man's shoulder, surprised by how sharp his bones felt under his fingers. "You are right," he said, forcing the words out of his mouth. "We have waited patiently. We are ready." But he had seen what awaited them. He'd seen the jaws of hell open wide and swallow them whole. And when their flesh touched the flames, it would burn away all hope, all faith, all love. Only then would the demon Azazel feast. Only then would it be satiated. "Master," croaked one of the disciples, and he thought, these fools don't know what they're asking for. But he didn't say that. He closed his eyes. In doing so, he became the vessel through which the horror would enter the world. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, for it was on this night, the eve of the final fast, the leader, his face etched with determination, spoke in a low voice, "It is time." One of the disciples hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. The leader shook his head, his gaze unwavering. They rose to their feet, their limbs stiff from lack of movement, and began to walk. As they walked, the desert seemed to stretch endlessly before them. Finally, they arrived at their destination. The leader turned to his disciples, his face grim. They stood in a circle around the monolith, their hands joined, their heads bowed in unison. "Azazel, Azazel, hear our call," the leader chanted, his voice rising above the howling wind. With each repetition of the chant, the energy in the circle grew, the tension mounting until it was almost palpable. The leader's eyes blazed with determination. And in that moment, as the vortex reached its peak, something stirred in the darkness beyond their campfire. A voice boomed, echoing with the power of 1,000 thunders. "I am Azazel, Lord of the Abyss." Their wish had been granted, but now the true horror of their bargain began to dawn on them. The leader, his face contorted in a mixture of triumph and terror, stammered, I wanted power. I wanted strength." Azazel's laughter echoed across the wasteland. With a wave of his unseen hand, Azazel unleashed his power, enveloping the group in a torrent of dark energy. When the torrent subsided and the dust settled, the 5 stood there. Azazel loomed over them, his form shifting and changing, a grotesque parody of humanity. And then Azazel did something that took the leader by surprise. He reached out and touched one of the disciples. His skin had peeled away to reveal the bones beneath. He looked at his master, his features obscured by the darkness, and mouthed silently, "What have we done?" The leader, his voice raspy and hollow, replied, "We have unleashed hell itself." Yet despite their monstrous forms, despite the horror that now dwelt within them, a flicker of recognition remained in their eyes. And with that memory came a burning question. The leader, his gaze fixed on the ground, found no answer. There was no justification for what they had done. They were now creatures of the night. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, the 5 figures stumbled through the desert, yet they were creatures of the night now.